Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21, verses 1 through 11. Hi, I'm Jesus. You remember me from last Sunday, and if you don't, that's okay. This story's even better. So, in this story, there is a crowd and a donkey and characters, more characters, but I'm only sheltering in place with two other family members. So I'm gonna have a little help from my friends. This is disciple 1. This is disciple 2. And this is Jesus. I hope you enjoy today's Bible story.
Oh, this is such a long walk. I hope we're getting close. Hey, Jesus, where are we going?
Well, our map says that we're getting close to Bethany. We want to get to Jerusalem, which is only a bit farther past Bethany.
Oh, yeah. I see the Mount of Olives. You're right. We're almost to Bethany. Whew. Anybody have more water?
Yep, just a bit, but you can finish it if we are getting close to Jerusalem.
All right, guys. Once you have had a drink, I need you to run ahead and do a favor for me.
Anything, Jesus. You know we'd do anything for you.
When you get to the village, search high and low for the donkey, but not just any donkey. I need a special donkey, a donkey that has never been ridden before.
Never been ridden before? This ought to be interesting. What do we do when we find the donkey?
Untie the donkey and bring it to me as quickly as you can.
Okay, but what if someone asks us why we are running off with their donkey?
Just say, the Lord needs him.
Really? Just say the Lord needs him? We won't get in trouble?
Trust me, it'll work.
Well, okay, Jesus, if you say so. Can you believe it? The Messiah riding into Jerusalem on a humble donkey? Don't they know they're going to look ridiculous?
I know. Why not a great chariot? Or at least a proper horse?
Maybe they're making a point.
Huh. Yeah, that would be just like Jesus, always making some point. Ooh, now that you mention it, I think I read about this somewhere in the Hebrew Bible, that the king would ride in on a donkey.
But where are we going to find a donkey that's never been ridden before?
We'll just have to look around. Let's ask these folks if they've seen one. Excuse me? Does anyone know who has a donkey that has never been ridden?
Yes, there's a young one right here.
Thank you.
Quick, let's bring him back to Jesus.
Hey, what are you doing? That donkey doesn't belong to you. Where are you going?
The Lord needs him.
Jesus, mission accomplished. We got a donkey that has never been ridden, just like you wanted.
Oh, thanks, guys. This donkey is perfect.
Jerusalem, here we come.
Hosanna! Hosanna! Blessed are they who come. Hosanna! The King in God's name.
Hosanna! All's well in heaven. Hosanna!
Glory in the high places.
Hosanna! Do you hear that? Wow, look at all these people. It's like they've come for a parade.
Teacher, get your people under control. Make them stop shouting. This is a well-mannered city. Keep them under control.
It wouldn't matter if I told my disciples or the crowd to be quiet. The rocks on the road would make noise for them. the rocks themselves would shout praise to God.
Thank you, beloved Ask family, bringing the gospel alive for us again. We're so grateful to you. And now it's time for the sermon. Before the pandemic was on our radar screens, we chose the book, Transforming Communities, How People Like You Are Healing Their Neighborhoods, for one of our all-church reads for Lent. We didn't know we would literally be living that title this Lent, watching our neighborhoods transform before our eyes. The book was written by Rev Sandhya Jha, our neighbor and the director of the Oakland Peace Center. OPC is nested in First Christian Church Disciples of Christ, a small congregation in Oakland where Sandhya was pastor for years. Today, that church building houses dozens of nonprofits who live collegially and work collaboratively for the good of the East Bay and beyond under the banner of the Oakland Peace Center. Sandhya came and preached to us after our church fire while we were still sheltering at Congregation Bethel. She's good in a crisis, and so we're blessed to have her back as our preacher today. And we're doubly blessed because she's also going to join us live for a learning hour after the after party today. And during our time together, she'll help us think about the vision we enacted last September and how to give it even more life, just as she's witnessed other ordinary people do in extraordinary ways in communities just like ours. Beloved, take a deep breath. Open your ears, your heart, and mind to Reverend Sandhya Jha.
Hey friends, what a weird time to be gathering and yet not gathered. Normally, this is my favorite time of year. I have looked forward to Holy Week as kind of the most important spiritual part of my year ever since I was a youth. This is the week that I look forward to as a way of regrounding myself, of being connected with my community as we go on this roller coaster ride together, but at least we don't have to navigate all of the highs and lows alone. What a weird time to be gathering digitally because we can't gather physically, to remember the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem with crowds piling in on each other to get close to him and to be part of the action at a time where we have to make space for each other in ways we would never have dreamt about just a few weeks ago. So I wrote a devotion on this passage that was part of a Holy Week devotional, and I wrote it all the way back in January. It was focused on the notion of Jesus' humility. I was really drawn to what it meant to be worshiping a humble servant king and to be grounded in that way of being. If all of us could be servants to each other, if all of us sought out leadership that was humble, that was vulnerable, that wasn't braggadocious or cocksure, what kind of a world we could live in. Now, I was writing that devotional while a couple of homeless mothers were occupying a vacant home in West Oakland. It was a home that was owned by a shell corporation. Dozens of homes had been bought up around our city by one company under lots of different names so that we wouldn't realize what was going on. And they were keeping those homes vacant to drive up housing prices. as people I knew were going homeless. Now, I found myself thinking about a particular mother that I had met through various church circles in Oakland. She was a member of a church in Oakland and had lost her home because the rents kept going up and up. She was living in her car because it was the only way that she could get to work and still be home in time to help her kids with their homework so that she could keep them in the school that they had been in before they lost their apartment. She wanted to provide that stability for them in this time of crisis. So I kept thinking of this mom as I thought about those moms who were doing what some people referred to as political theater, moving into a home in a very loud and noticeable way so that they could bring attention to the crisis the community was in and to remind folks it didn't have to be that way, that homeless mothers didn't have to be homeless, that we didn't have to live in a community where there were 4 vacant units for every homeless family. And so for maybe not the first time, I found myself revisiting this passage and realizing that Jesus might have been up to a little bit of political satire with his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Some of you may know about the Roman imperial procession that was happening on the other side of the city at the same time as Jesus' march into Jerusalem. It always happened during Passover, during the festival where Jewish people remembered how the angel of death had passed over them, how God had led them into freedom, and how they had eventually been led into the land that they currently lived on. And so every Passover season, the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, would lead a huge military parade. It was very much Rome's way of saying, you can celebrate your freedom from Egypt, but remember who really has the power. You can have your party, just as long as you don't mess with us. I found myself thinking about Moms for Housing, the homeless mothers living in that house, who were allowed to have their fun until the police rolled in armored vehicles in the early morning hours to haul them away to jail and take them away from their children. And so I found myself thinking about this passage where I had always been touched by that image of gentle Jesus, meek and mild, riding into such a big city on a humble donkey. And this time I found myself wondering if maybe Jesus wasn't just being humble, but he was being a little bit snarky in saying, check out those guys over there and how messed up their priorities are. Now, I like to think that Jesus was doing a couple of things when he was organizing this parade, this march, this protest, whatever you want to call it. He was definitely referencing Zechariah 9:9, where the prophet Zechariah says, behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey. As First Congregational Church of Berkeley sits with this theme of making space, I think it is a gift to us to get to pause and think about this King bringing salvation in such a humble fashion. I imagine that when Jesus was organizing this procession, he was thinking about humility, about cooperation, about how another way is possible. I like to think that he was referencing this passage and saying to his beloved children, his beloved siblings, his beloved followers, there's a thing going on over there, but there's another way. We can live in a world that is grounded in even our leaders being humble, being vulnerable, not being arrogant, but being willing to listen, being willing to ride alongside regular people. The thing is, Jesus also knew what the next line in the scripture was. Zechariah 9:10 says, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations. In other words, Jesus was showing us what the one way, the glorious, peace-filled, humble way, could look like, that was joyous as well as humble, where people were having fun and celebrating and cheering and singing, a joy-filled, collaborative community where one leader didn't need to dictate all the terms, the Zechariah 9:9 passage, but also he was pointing to what was wrong with that other march. He was saying, war and bravado will kill us. He was pointing to Rome and saying, your war horse, your battle bow, your chariots will fall because you have mistaken those for real power, instead of recognizing the power of God that is grounded in people extending compassion and love and playfulness and joy with each other. He shall speak peace to the nations, promised Zechariah. And as Jesus rode into Jerusalem in that protest march, he was proclaiming peace to the nations. It was a noble sentiment, but it was also profoundly practical. I recently heard a scientist being interviewed about her new book, which is about what she calls the survival of the friendliest. Now, the journalist who was interviewing her was very skeptical because he knew very well that it's survival of the fittest, that our ability to beat out weaker people is what allows us to survive the worst in the world. This scientist, however, was saying actually throughout all of history, those who are able to collaborate, those who show generosity, those who are able to build community, even in times of adversity, are the ones who have historically been the ones to survive biological and political and military violence the best. In some ways, Jesus' procession into Jerusalem showed what it looked like for a community to rally together, to show up for each other, to cheer on a different vision for our communities. In contrast with an awe-inspiring but terrifying, isolating, lonely-making processional happening on the other side of the city by the powers that be. Survival of the friendliest. It's a noble vision and also a practical one, which is true of so much of Jesus' teachings. And at this time where we are forced into isolation, and when so many of our siblings do not have the resources they need, when our food pantries are running out of food, when our colleagues at places like Boss and Grip and the other communities that provide food for those without shelter don't have enough volunteers, when there are so many mothers without housing, in a community where there are 4 empty units for every homeless family? I wonder who we will make space for. I wonder in this Holy Week how that will honor an incredibly humble King who wants us to prioritize those who are least well served by the powers that be. And I wonder if who we make space for will be our salvation.